Webinar sobre o setor dos materiais de construção no Reino Unido. Vamos analisar os desafios e oportunidades que o setor oferece num contexto especialmente difícil, onde se combinam o Brexit, o Covid e alterações climáticas. E por que o tema de hoje? Porque parte importante do plano de recuperação económica do Reino Unido no cenário pós-Covid assenta precisamente na construção. Ao longo da próxima hora e meia, vamos explorar as oportunidades que a crise nos oferece e a melhor forma de abordar este mercado. Algumas notas sobre o funcionamento deste webinar. Recordo que deve manter a sua câmara desligada, também deve manter o seu microfone desligado. Mantenha, no entanto, ligada a sua curiosidade em fazer perguntas no final das apresentações. Por favor, coloque as suas questões em inglês, uma vez que essa é a língua de trabalho dos nossos convidados. Ao longo desta sessão, irei alternar entre inglês e português, conforme faça mais sentido a cada momento. E em inglês nos entendemos por agora. To welcome our special guests, we will address today challenges and opportunities in the building materials sector in the UK with the help of Steve Watts, partner at Alinea Consulting Company, Fergus Harridens, Deputy Director for Construction in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Gentlemen, lovely to have you with us today. I will be with you shortly. In the meantime, I would like to welcome my colleague, Pedro Patrício. Pedro Patrício is the head of the Portuguese Trade and Investment Agency in London. Pedro, é um prazer ver-te por aqui. Para abrir esta sessão, talvez pedir-te que nos coloques ao corrente dos últimos desenvolvimentos no mercado, a importância do Reino Unido para Portugal, os impactos do Covid, sem esquecer aquela questão central que, por momentos, o Covid colocou em segundo plano, e a pergunta é em que ponto é que estamos em relação ao Brexit. Pedro, bem-vindo, a palavra é tua.
Muito obrigado, Carlos.
Pedro, pode avançar.
Slide.
Estamos a ouvir.
Fergus and Steve, once again, it's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for having accepted our invitation. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, é um prazer estar aqui hoje convosco. Como o meu colega Carlos referiu, vamos falar sobre o setor de materiais de construção e construção no mercado britânico. Eu farei uma apresentação genérica sobre a importância do mercado do Reino Unido, a importância do mercado bilateral Portugal, relacionamento bilateral Portugal-Reino Unido. Tocarei um pouco no setor de materiais de construção e toda a importância que também tem para a nossa economia, bem como, claro, naturalmente, não poderei deixar de falar sobre o Covid, o impacto que o Covid teve e tem na economia e o que se pode esperar no futuro próximo e no futuro mais longínquo para este setor e, naturalmente, o Brexit e um pouco as oportunidades e constrangimentos que o Brexit pode trazer para as nossas empresas. Gostaria de focar mais, talvez, na parte positiva e estou totalmente à disposição para responder a questões e perguntas que possam ter. Fergus and Steve, my presentation will be, I'll try to make a short presentation. I'll give a broad overview on the UK market, the bilateral relationship between Portugal and the UK, a little bit on COVID and the economic impact it has had in the United Kingdom, and perhaps a bit on Brexit as well. Of course, your opinions, your experts' opinions on these issues will also be very interesting for us to hear and perhaps confirm what I've said if we are on the same page. As I said, my presentation will be in Portuguese, but I think from the slides you will be able to understand a little bit on some of the topics that I will be speaking. And now to my presentation. Que não haja dúvidas que o mercado britânico, o mercado do Reino Unido, é um mercado de uma importância extraordinária. Estamos a falar da quinta, extraordinária a nível mundial, da quinta economia mundial, da segunda economia da Europa, 10º exportador de bens do mundo, o segundo exportador de serviços do mundo, o quinto importador de serviços do mundo e o 6º importador de serviços do mundo. São dados que, de facto, colocam este país como um dos principais países económicos, um parceiro de grande importância. A segunda parte deste slide fala sobre o relacionamento bilateral e o mercado britânico é o nosso primeiro cliente de serviços, o nosso quarto cliente de bens. o que significa que é um mercado de uma importância extrema e temos que estar atentos ao futuro próximo, ao que se avizinha e transformar as preocupações e os constrangimentos em oportunidades e ver se conseguimos, sim, tirar e aumentar a nossa cota de mercado. Esse é o trabalho da AICEP, aumentar o número de empresas exportadoras, aumentar a cota de mercado para os nossos produtores e certamente que no setor de materiais de construção esta é uma área que nós devemos trabalhar. Mas se o mercado britânico é importante pelos valores que aqui referi, também o é importante pelos valores da balança comercial. Nós temos um superávit, ou seja, Portugal exporta muito mais do que importa do Reino Unido. Nós temos um superávit de cerca de 1,5 mil milhões de euros, o que para a nossa economia é algo importantíssimo e quem nos dera a nós que este superávit ou que esta balança comercial se pudesse repetir em muitos outros países. Em 2000, para ter um pouco uma noção dos valores, nós estamos a falar que em 2019 Portugal exportou para o Reino Unido aproximadamente 9,5 mil milhões de euros. Eu acrescentaria, vou falar um pouco também mais para a frente, nos slides à frente, da evolução em 2020 no espaço de Covid, mas se exportamos 9,5 mil milhões de euros em 2019, há que ter em conta que também estamos a falar de mais de 3 mil empresas exportadoras. Este é um mercado de grande importância para as empresas portuguesas. Temos algumas empresas, grandes empresas que têm este mercado como o seu principal mercado e não tão diversificado. Portanto, é mais uma razão para nos preocuparmos e para estarmos atentos ao que se avizinha. Em 2020, no primeiro semestre, os dados não são assim tão, mesmo em pleno Covid, não são tão negativos e, sobretudo, se compararmos com outros países para onde Portugal exporta. Em termos de bens, tivemos um decréscimo de 22% e em termos de serviços, aí sim, de 45%. Na área dos serviços, o que se pode dizer, e como calculo que a maioria de nós saibamos bem, enquanto portugueses, a importância que o turismo tem. O principal serviço é o turismo e representa cerca de 50% do total das nossas exportações. Portanto, aqui é de facto algo grave e sabemos que o nosso setor do turismo está a atravessar uma crise e grande parte por causa do avultado número de turistas britânicos que todos os anos era o principal destino e o principal país emissor de turistas para Portugal. No setor, portanto, de bens, os principais setores são os automóveis e outros veículos, portanto, que inclui partes e acessórios de automóveis, muito interempresas, aparelhos de radiodetecção, radionavegação, de GPS, também ligado ao setor automóvel, calçado, portanto, calçados entramos já no setor mais tradicional, papel e cartão, medicamentos, vinhos, fios condutores e fibras ópticas, entre outros. Portanto, temos um leque bastante alargado, o que é positivo para a nossa economia. No setor automóvel, onde, de certa forma, pode-nos ultrapassar um pouco, porque isto é a nível mundial, temos, de facto, uma preocupação séria, até porque é dos principais setores das nossas exportações. Passando ao setor de materiais de construção. Em 2018, os materiais de construção representavam 5,4% do total das nossas exportações para o mercado. Em 2009, 5,65%, ou seja, quase o mesmo, e nos primeiros 4 meses de 2020, 5%. Ou seja, não vimos, a cota de mercado mantém-se similar, mas o que se verifica é que há um decréscimo das nossas exportações. E o que se vê neste setor, das nossas exportações em geral, e o que se vê neste setor é que há uma subida progressiva das exportações e importações de 2016 a 2019, o que é obviamente positivo, que é o que nos interessa, e o saldo da nossa balança comercial é positivo nesse mesmo período e temos um superávit, chegámos a ter em 2019 um superávit de 970 milhões de euros. Nos 4 primeiros meses de 2020, chamemos de 2020, entramos no período do Covid, vemos as exportações aqui irem 14,2% face ao mesmo período do ano transato, 2019. Está relacionado com a pandemia e com o encerramento das atividades de construção a partir de março. Mas as importações, obviamente, também caíram, essas 8,5%, e isso permitiu-nos manter um saldo positivo da balança comercial de cerca de 250 milhões de euros. Menos do que gostaríamos, ainda positivo. Temos é que tentar aumentar e ver como é que conseguimos manter e aumentar este saldo positivo da nossa balança comercial. Os materiais de construção mais exportados por esta ordem são os metais, madeiras, rochas ornamentais, cerâmica, cortiça, plásticos, cimentos, gesso, betão, tintas, vernizes e vidro. Nos primeiros 4 meses de 2020, todas estas categorias baixaram as exportações, quando comparando com o ano transato, no mesmo período, à exceção das tintas e vernizes. E a maior queda verifica-se em 2020, foi o vidro, com 34%, o cimento, gesso e betão, 27%, e as roças ornamentais, 20%. Passando então à pandemia em números no Reino Unido. Se comecei a minha apresentação por referir a importância do mercado e como economicamente estamos num país, um gigante económico, aqui pelas razões negativas também estamos perante uma situação tremendamente grave e a nível mundial das mais graves. Casos confirmados, estamos a falar do terceiro país na Europa, com mais de 378 mil casos confirmados, mortes associadas, mais de 40 mil, o primeiro país na Europa e o quinto a nível global. As zonas mais afetadas são a Inglaterra, seguido, no início, Londres, maioritariamente Londres, depois seguido para outras regiões, tem-se deslocado para zonas como Aberdeen, Glasgow, Leicester, Luton, Northampton, Manchester e por aí afora. Registrou-se um pico no início, como se pode verificar, no início de abril, que decresceu em maio até julho, e a altura em que os novos casos começaram e que ainda não pararam de subir. Ainda hoje o Boris Johnson fez algumas declarações que falarei um pouco mais à frente. O número de casos detectados desde julho está relacionado com o número de testes efetuados, como temos visto nos nossos noticiários, nas notícias em Portugal, que têm também bastante falado sobre a situação no Reino Unido. Os números oficiais diários continuam a aumentar e ao dia de ontem registavam-se 3.899 novos casos de pandemia detectados. O Chief Scientific Officer veio alertar que o número de casos diários pode subir para os 50 mil em outubro e o número de mortes por dia para os 200, o que, se o governo não tomar nenhuma medida, o que se avizinha não é de todo algo positivo. Daí as declarações que se esperavam, muito esperadas, e que hoje o Boris Johnson as fez. Ainda o Covid, mas agora um pouco no impacto da economia, o PIB no primeiro semestre, o PIB britânico cai 22% na primeira metade do ano, que é resultado, é apenas ultrapassado pela Espanha, que teve 22,7%, e as maiores quedas registadas depois do Reino Unido, temos a título comparativo o Reino Unido com 18,9% e a Itália com 17,9%, ou seja, o Reino Unido destaca-se pela negativa. O segundo trimestre, portanto, de abril a junho, foi o que naturalmente mais contribuiu para a recessão, já coincide com a adoção de medidas de contenção do Covid, aquilo que os britânicos chamam, e que nós todos passamos a chamar do lockdown, com uma queda de 20,4% do PIB, superior a Portugal, que nessa altura se fixou nos 16,5%. E, meus senhores, minhas senhoras, o setor que mais contribuiu para a queda foi precisamente o setor da construção. Menos 35% no segundo trimestre, o que se explica não só pelo facto das obras terem completamente parado durante o lockdown, mas também pela forte dependência de uma cadeia de abastecimento que também se viu obrigada a parar, levando à escassez de materiais. A seguir à construção, o setor dos serviços com cerca de 20% negativos e um decréscimo da produção industrial de cerca de 17%. Segundo as previsões da OCDE para o ano 2020, a queda do PIB britânico vai se fixar nos 14%, valor que supera o previsto para Portugal de cerca de 11%, e a média de 11,3% para Portugal e zona euro 11,5%. Mas como todos nós sabemos, estas previsões de um dia para o outro vão mudando. De qualquer maneira, não são previsões positivas para a Europa no seu todo e para o Reino Unido também. Passando ao impacto, ao consumo e o retalho, o impacto do Covid no consumo e o retalho, aqui os números e os valores também não são positivos. O consumo caiu mais de 40% em abril deste ano e face ao mesmo período do ano passado. E para tal contribuiu principalmente a queda no consumo de bens perecíveis e de serviços. No retalho, a queda dramática do volume de vendas a retalho em abril, com o encerramento dos estabelecimentos comerciais. Porém, com a reabertura dos estabelecimentos comerciais, o retalho tem vindo a recuperar. Em julho, volumes de venda subiram 3% superiores aos de fevereiro, portanto, pré-Covid. A 23 de março, o Reino Unido entrou em full lockdown e assim permaneceu durante 7 semanas. Portanto, a economia para, ou quase toda a economia para. E a economia começou a reabrir progressivamente somente em maio. Hoje temos as escolas, o retalho, os restaurantes, hotéis e bares abertos, com uma série de obrigações que falaremos um bocadinho mais à frente, algumas que são cumpridas, outras não. O desemprego está em 4,1%, já subiu dos 3,9%, que tinha sido o valor mais baixo que o Reino Unido tinha atingido desde 1974, e as previsões apontam para 11%, as previsões do Bank of England. A inflação em julho fixava-se no 1,1%, desceu para os 0,5% em agosto e fica mais longe do objetivo de médio e longo prazo definido pelo Banco de Inglaterra de 2,2%. E este resultado é fruto de uma série de medidas de apoio promovidas pelo governo britânico que fizeram cair os preços no consumidor a níveis de 2015. A restauração foi o setor que mais contribuiu para a queda da inflação, com a introdução do Eat Out to Help Out. Foi um programa organizado pelo governo que ofereceu descontos nas refeições em agosto a quem fosse à restauração e em menor escala uma redução do IVA para a hotelaria passou dos 20% para 5%. Portanto, são os esforços que o governo tem vindo a fazer, à semelhança dos esforços que nos outros países da União Europeia temos vindo a fazer, uma série de esforços têm vindo a fazer para tentar que a queda não seja tão dramática nestes setores que são os mais preocupantes. Relativamente às empresas em insolvência, não temos o número exato das empresas, posso dar alguns exemplos. O Debenhams tem 22 mil postos de trabalho em risco, portanto estamos a falar de uma grande superfície. DW Sports, como o próprio nome diz, uma empresa ligada ao desporto, 1.700 postos de trabalho. Peter Jones, que também é uma grande superfície de retalho, com 8 grandes superfícies, também está em risco de encerrar. Harvey Furniture tem 105 lojas de mobiliário no Reino Unido, emprega 1.575 funcionários também para fechar, e não temos bem noção, a nível das PMEs, de trabalhadores de conta própria do estado em que o país se encontra. A dívida pública aqui também não é famosa e ultrapassou o valor do PIB pela primeira vez nos últimos 50 anos. O governo britânico endividou-se em 67 mil milhões de libras em maio, valor superior total à dívida pública do ano financeiro de 2019-2020. E até ao momento, a fatura do Covid já custou 210 mil milhões ao Reino Unido e a previsão é que até ao final do ano chegue aos 300 mil milhões de libras até ao final do ano. Portanto, são valores particularmente elevados com um impacto dramático, que pode ter um impacto dramático na vida britânica e na economia do Reino Unido. Relativamente aos apoios, não vou entrar, são 190 medidas de apoio, falarei apenas de algumas. Facilidade de acesso ao crédito e isenção de impostos para empresas afetadas pela pandemia, disponibilização de subsídios de apoio aos setores mais afetados, turismo, restauração, cultura, naturalmente o entretenimento, apoio à saúde, obviamente, e à investigação e desenvolvimento, proteção de arrendatários e comerciais e habitacionais e proteção dos trabalhadores e desempregados. Talvez faça aqui referência ao Job Retention Scheme, onde se paga cerca de 80% do salário. Esta medida beneficia 9,6 milhões de trabalhadores, só que termina já em outubro e estamos todos à espera para ver que medida vem a seguir para ajudar todos estes 9,6 milhões de trabalhadores. Quanto às medidas de saúde pública, eu vou muito rapidamente passar as mesmas, não vou entrar em detalhe. Rule of Six é não ter mais do que 6 pessoas ao mesmo tempo juntas, o uso da máscara, a obrigatoriedade da máscara. O Rule of Six é não ter mais do que 6 pessoas, mas se formos no metro, nos autocarros e nos off-license, nas mercearias, muitas vezes vemos mais do que 6 pessoas, e se estivermos no pub também vemos mais do que 6 pessoas. O uso da máscara é obrigatório nos transportes públicos, para não falar na minha experiência própria do que eu já vi. A jornalista que ouvia hoje de manhã referia ela própria que tinha estado no autocarro, contou 20 pessoas, dessas 20 pessoas, 18 não tinham máscara, só 2 é que tinham. Hoje o Boris Johnson avança, ou ontem avançava-se que as multas iriam passar até aos 10 mil, mas custa-nos um pouco a perceber quando se anda de metro e de facto vê-se muitas pessoas a não cumprirem as instruções que o governo dá, e quer nos autocarros, quer nos transportes públicos, portanto, o metro, nas próprias grandes superfícies. Até hoje, até a apresentação de hoje do Primeiro-Ministro, os trabalhadores da loja não tinham que usar máscara, já os clientes sim. Portanto, há uma série de medidas, e o que as pessoas dizem é que as medidas não têm sido claras, não têm sido preto no branco o que se pretende ou não se pretende fazer, e, portanto, há, de certa maneira, um laxismo bastante grande, laxismo este que tem sido referido agora pelo Governo, e que isso não pode ser, de facto, os números, como já vos apresentei, têm vindo a piorar e tem que se tomar medidas mais fortes, e hoje, a partir de hoje, novamente ficou dito pelo Primeiro-Ministro para quem possa trabalhar de casa que o faça. Tracking records, quando se entra num bar ou se entra num restaurante, deve-se pôr o nome da pessoa e o número de telemóvel, mas não há confirmação nenhuma, às vezes pedem, às vezes não pedem, e se acaso alguém seja infectado, eles poderem contactar as outras pessoas. Enfim, o feedback que tenho recebido não é muito positivo que tenha resultado. Quarentena obrigatória também, o que se sabe é que não tem havido quarentena obrigatória para quem regressa de países que eles consideraram não são países que se chamam corredor vermelho ou alerta vermelho, que regressam de países onde há uma infecção que eles consideram que está acima, a pessoa tem que ficar de quarentena. Ou a pessoa apanhou Covid e deve ficar de quarentena, só que não há qualquer controle, ou não tem havido controle disso. Portanto, o corredor aéreo, Portugal fez parte da linha verde, e aí sim viu-se que os turistas britânicos começaram novamente a ir a Portugal. Na semana seguinte, os nossos números aumentaram, retiraram do corredor aéreo esses britânicos que regressavam a casa, que regressavam ao Reino Unido, deveriam ficar em isolamento. E esse isolamento, pelo que sabemos, não é, e pelo que eu posso ver da minha experiência aqui, não é tão cumprido. Certamente que não é cumprido como nós vemos a ser cumprido em Portugal. Ou seja, neste slide eu passei muito rapidamente, tenho toda a disponibilidade para vos falar em mais detalhes se considerarem interessante, mas acredito e vejo que os nossos noticiários e em Portugal temos vindo a acompanhar o Reino Unido e a evolução no Reino Unido, infelizmente, neste caso, não pelas melhores razões. Relativamente ao Brexit, que era obviamente um grande tema, que deixou de ser durante todo este período de Covid, por razões compreensíveis, até deixaram de haver as reuniões e agora voltamos a estar em cima da mesa. Não nos vamos falar sobre os diversos cenários que o Covid oferece. A AICEP fez inúmeras ações de divulgação, roadshow pelo país e temos previsto mais 2 ou 3 sessões de esclarecimento sobre o que se espera ou o que se pode esperar do Brexit. Aqui eu vou somente falar de 2 ou 3 pontos principais. O primeiro é, como todos sabem, o Reino Unido saiu da União Europeia no ano passado. Este ano ainda tem as mesmas regras do mercado único e da União Aduaneira. A partir do próximo ano será um novo sistema. Se não chegarmos a acordo, a União Europeia, se não chegar a acordo com o governo britânico, passa-se às regras da Organização Mundial do Comércio, o World Trade Organization. Aqui acrescentaria o que está em cima da mesa, é que no 9 de setembro o Primeiro-Ministro Boris Johnson fez aprovar a proposta da Lei do Mercado Interno, LMI, que dá a capacidade de tomar decisões unilaterais sobre questões relativas ao comércio com a província da Irlanda do Norte. Por outras palavras, o Parlamento britânico, ao fazer isto, ao haver uma aprovação do Parlamento britânico, o Reino Unido entra em incumprimento da lei internacional. Permitirá ao Reino Unido, ao governo em Londres, se quiser, pôr uma fronteira física entre a Irlanda do Norte e a República da Irlanda. Aquilo que, desde o início, se tentou evitar e que poderá, obviamente, trazer graves problemas para o futuro, se assim se avançar. Mas o mais grave é toda a credibilidade que o Reino Unido tem e que se pretende ver de um país como este, um país que está a fazer acordos bilaterais com não sei quantos outros países, não pode estar a quebrar uma regra tão importante como esta, as leis internacionais. De tal ponto que a polémica é uma manobra polémica que tem sido alvo de intensas críticas pela oposição, naturalmente, mas também pelo próprio partido do Boris Johnson. E o que eu talvez acrescentaria aqui, já houve quem se tenha demitido, mas acrescentaria aqui o comentário que o Joe Biden faz, que se for eleito presidente, recusa-se a ver promulgada o acordo entre os Estados Unidos da América e o Reino Unido, porque é uma clara quebra da lei internacional. Temos já houve muitos estudos, levantamentos sobre o impacto que o Brexit pode ter na nossa economia, a nível mundial, a nível europeu, a nível nacional. Nos nossos setores há estudos feitos, temos aqui a referência a um dos estudos, que continua, apesar de já ter, penso que mais do que um ano, continua a ser bastante atualizado, porque estamos a falar dos setores. Aqui, em termos de constrangimentos, o principal receio seria a perda de cota de mercado, a perda das nossas exportações para países que não estão dentro da União Europeia. O acordo que seja feito, eles já fizeram 19 acordos com países e territórios desta União Europeia, e estes acordos representam um pouco mais de 8% do comércio total do Reino Unido. Portanto, não é considerável, é um risco que vale a pena ter em mente, mas eu não diria que seja algo de grave e que vamos estar a perder cota de mercado para países de produtores na Ásia. Não. Aliás, o próprio nearshoring nosso, a nossa boa qualidade, há inúmeros fatores que fazem com que isso possa não ser um risco. Dos principais setores mais afetados, como aqui diz, vão ser os principais setores das nossas exportações, e à cabeça estará o setor automóvel, que vai desde os OEMs ao Tier 1 e Tier 2. Aqui faria, a título de curiosidade e de interesse, no setor automóvel, as principais organizações representativas dos fabricantes de veículos e de componentes automóveis na União Europeia, a Associação Europeia de Fabricantes de Automóveis, a Associação Europeia de Fornecedores de Componentes para Automóveis, e com 21 associações nacionais de 21 países da União Europeia, incluindo a nossa FIA, vieram apelar a que o Reino Unido e a União Europeia unam esforços no sentido de garantir um acordo de comércio livre. O comunicado de imprensa da indústria afirma que o no deal porá em causa a produção de 3 milhões de veículos nos próximos 5 anos. Isso traduzirá em perdas comerciais no valor de 110 mil milhões de euros até 2025. O impacto colocará em risco o setor automóvel europeu, que emprega 14,6 milhões de pessoas. Ou seja, estamos a atravessar momentos históricos, decisivos e que podem afetar a nossa vida, o nosso dia-a-dia, o nosso trabalho. Os outros setores, equipamento elétrico, informáticos, farmacêuticos, têxteis, vestuários, entre outros, como podem ver no slide. Aqui, outros constrangimentos. Temos as regras adicionais para a imigração de cidadãos da União Europeia para o Reino Unido. O que se vê, uma das coisas que se falou durante a campanha do Brexit é que era tentar pôr um travão na imigração, portanto, imigrantes a virem para o Reino Unido. A verdade é que se viu, de facto, sim, um travão de imigrantes da União Europeia a vir para o Reino Unido e um aumento de imigrantes de outras nacionalidades de países, nomeadamente de países asiáticos. E eles criaram um novo sistema em fevereiro, que exige que os candidatos preencham os requisitos que garantam um mínimo de 70 pontos. Tem que falar bem inglês, ganha 10 pontos. Ter uma oferta de emprego, 20 pontos. Qualificações académicas mínimas, 12º ou superior, 20 pontos. A oferta de trabalho deve garantir um salário mínimo de 25.600 libras, mais não sei quantos pontos. Meus caros, parece-me que estão a criar aqui umas burocracias que, compreensivelmente, os resultados foram já um decréscimo de número de imigrantes da União Europeia para o Reino Unido. A desvalorização da libra esterlina face ao euro levará ao aumento da competitividade dos produtos do Reino Unido e o menor poder de compra dos britânicos, portanto, aqui sim algo a termos em conta, e os procedimentos aduaneiros e controle fronteiriço. Tentarei ser o mais diplomático possível. Talvez não todos, mas a maioria dos estudos e os comentários que ouvimos de especialistas no setor e que acompanhamos, obviamente, aqui de uma forma muito próxima, tudo indica que o Reino Unido e a União Europeia não estamos preparados para que agora se venham colocar fronteiras físicas entre os dois países. E os estudos britânicos dizem que necessitam de formar novos agentes alfandegários, 50 mil novos agentes, que necessitam de pelo menos 3 anos de formação. Será também necessário formar agentes portuários, camionistas e veterinários para que fiquem familiarizados com os novos procedimentos, o que também não está a acontecer. 10 plataformas online diferentes, são necessárias 10 plataformas online diferentes para o processamento de toda a documentação necessária, sendo que algumas delas ainda não foram criadas. Ou seja, do lado britânico, vemos que o empresário britânico, agora que se começa a aproximar o fim do ano, vê, a abertura muito grande de um no deal e 2, a sua situação, porque 50% das suas vendas são para a União Europeia e muitas destas empresas só vendem para a União Europeia e vão ter que começar a fazer uma burocracia da OMC que não estão habituadas, porque nunca o fizeram muitas delas e que não têm. O Covid não veio ajudar e não estão preparadas para isso e não lhes estão a dar as ferramentas para que possam estar, de facto, preparadas para isso. e também vão criar a construção de uma infraestrutura em Kent, um parque de estacionamento para a gestão do tráfego para a região de Kent, ou seja, as alfândegas vão ficar paradas, prevê-se filas enormes de caminhões, é preciso escoar, é preciso just in time, a vizinha, se isto não funcionar corretamente, poderemos ter graves problemas. Mas estes graves problemas podem ser vistos como algo positivo se uma empresa portuguesa tiver um excelente relacionamento e já vende para o Reino Unido há muito tempo, se for de confiança, se conseguir atempadamente a nossa localização, se conseguir atempadamente posicionar-se e ter já algum estoque no mercado, há muitas formas onde podemos nos posicionar, porque os problemas que nós vamos ter serão os mesmos problemas que os nossos colegas e amigos e concorrentes espanhóis, franceses, italianos, belgas e de outras nacionalidades. Mas avizinham-se escassezes de estoques e se calhar aí nós podemos estar, cada um nos seus setores, setor agroalimentar, materiais de construção, informática, podemos estar atentos para ver onde é que estão as oportunidades que nós poderemos aproveitar. A nível das oportunidades, já falei um pouco agora aqui, portanto, a ideia britânica em Portugal, vê-se investimento, vê-se interesse das empresas britânicas, apesar do Covid, muitas delas que estão numa situação difícil, mas sabem que numa situação de um no deal, e mesmo numa situação onde há um acordo, mas numa situação onde não há um acordo, é fundamental para essas empresas se manterem competitivas, terem um pé na Europa continental, um pé na União Europeia. E o que nós vemos aqui na delegação da AICEP, isto é um trabalho que é feito, obviamente, de uma forma discreta, são empresas que nos batem à porta, ou quando nós falamos com multipliers e fazemos apresentações a potenciais investidores, há um grande interesse deles em saber, em investir no estrangeiro, em investir na Europa, e Portugal, por uma série de razões, somos um país particularmente competitivo, estamos muito bem vistos, isso, e por N razões também, pelos empresários britânicos, e o que constatamos é que de vários setores, serviços, de bens, há de startups, de empresas já mais bem posicionadas e já com outra dimensão, a olharem para Portugal e a investirem em Portugal. A nossa relação qualidade-preço é reconhecida no Reino Unido, de uma forma geral. As empresas portuguesas que têm uma presença no mercado britânico podem, no futuro, ter uma posição mais competitiva das outras que não têm, porque passa a ser, desde que tenham uma percentagem incorporada da sua produção feita cá, passa a ser como uma empresa britânica, passa a não ter as desvantagens das taxas aduaneiras que possam advir de uma OMC, passa a ser mais competitiva, digamos, como uma empresa francesa que não esteja cá presente. E vice-versa. Uma empresa francesa que tenha parte da sua produção ou que tenha uma filial cá, possivelmente, numa reunião que tenha com uma grande superfície ou com um ateliê de arquitetura, se calhar tem umas vantagens tem outras vantagens que uma empresa portuguesa que não esteja nessa situação. O e-commerce, não se pode deixar de falar, o e-commerce está em franco crescimento a nível mundial e o Reino Unido é o terceiro mercado a nível mundial de vendas online e é o primeiro na Europa. Normalmente, se calhar, pensaríamos que poderiam ser outros países, mas não, é o Reino Unido. E tem aumentado consideravelmente e as empresas que trabalhavam online têm estado a contratar desalmadamente. Têm estado a contratar imensa gente para fazer face a todos os pedidos, ao aumento de pedidos que temos visto e muitas empresas que não trabalhavam online passaram a trabalhar online. Diria que faz todo o sentido avaliarmos se para o vosso produto, se para a vossa empresa, isso poderá ser alguma forma de entrar ou de se manterem no mercado. Dependendo naturalmente do vosso setor. Por fim, este slide, esta apresentação é-vos facultada e tem aqui estes 3 links que sugiro que sejam vistos. Estes websites, estes hyperlinks ligam-vos a websites que têm inúmera informação. Não nos falta informação sobre os cenários que podem vir de um no deal ou de um deal, das burocracias que vamos ter em cima ou não. Temos acesso a essa informação. Se depois funcionam ou não é outra questão. Se o Reino Unido tiver uma app que funciona e que permite fazer o desalfandegamento antes da mercadoria ter saído de Portugal, essa será outra questão. Mas temos aqui o primeiro do gov.uk, Transition, que é os procedimentos a seguir para fazer face ao Brexit. Temos da União Europeia, da Comissão Europeia, comunicações setoriais sobre os preparativos para o Brexit, setoriais, portanto, a pessoa pode ver setorialmente, quem queira ler o dossiê é grande, setorial, e também tem pequenas notes e sumários executivos com as partes mais importantes. E a AICEP tem uma página para o Brexit com várias ligações, com informações úteis, de vários níveis, documentos úteis, e o dos seminários, PowerPoints dos seminários passados, mas talvez igualmente tão importante, a delegação aqui, os meus colegas em Portugal e a delegação aqui no Reino Unido, estamos totalmente à disposição para vos ajudar a procurar parceiros, ou quem não tenha a procurar parceiros, quem tenha parceiros a trabalhar com o vosso parceiro local e convosco para tentar aumentar a cota de mercados, e quando tivermos o Brexit, seja OMC ou não OMC, para, de preferência, evitar problemas que vos possam acontecer, mas para solucioná-los caso aconteçam e tentar fazê-lo de uma mais rápida forma possível para tentar minorar o efeito que isso possa ter na vossa empresa. Espero não ter alongado excessivamente. Ferguson, Steve, I did try to go as fast as possible, but there was a bit to say on such a timing, the turmoil that we're going through in the UK, and the timing is particularly sensitive. And we have major changes that may occur with Brexit, with COVID. So my presentation was quite broad, but I am certain that most of our guests that are here today, they're very interested in hearing your presentation on construction material. And I said, this is a sector of particular importance for Portugal, and we do have Portuguese companies highly competitive. And we have some of them here present, some with a presence in the UK market, others that are giving their first step to the UK market. So your presentations are particularly interesting for us as well. Meus caros, à disposição para responder às perguntas no final da apresentação. Carlos?
Thank you, Pedro, for walking us through the importance of the UK market for Portuguese exports. Extremely important, as you just outlined. Thank you also for profiling the building materials, Portuguese building materials exports for the UK. I will now welcome to the floor Steve Watts, partner of Alinea Consulting Company, to cover topics as the structural changes and challenges, and also opportunities that are facing building materials and the construction sector in the UK. Steve, thank you for being with us today. Please be welcome, and the floor is now yours.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Carlos and Pedro. Muito obrigado. And Fergus, hello to you. We haven't met or spoken, and I don't know to what extent our presentations will overlap or whether we will agree or disagree. We will see shortly. But my perspective is, good afternoon, everyone. My perspective is very much that of a cost consultant in the UK. We set up in business back in 2013. We do cost consultancy, or quantity surveying as it's also known, and nothing else. So that is my perspective, the economics of construction. And every 6 months we produce a paper on the market, the construction market in the UK, and a lot of work goes into that. And as you can imagine, increasingly so given the macroeconomic environment. And what we try to do is to take the geopolitics and macroeconomics and try and assess what that means for construction prices in the UK, and in particular London and the southeast of England, where most of our work is. And whilst construction prices have moved up and down over the past decade, in fact forever, there are things which haven't changed, and some structural challenges which we think the UK construction sector presents. But with those challenges, we believe come opportunities. And one of those things which I will talk briefly about later is the need to understand supply chains in more detail, to understand where goods and components are coming from, how they're being made and how they're being transported to the UK. Given both COVID and climate change, those are increasingly important things for us to understand. And I'll finish by giving you my take on what I think the key issues are for our industry moving forward. But if we look at the current market, and when I say the current market, I think it's important to look before COVID, which feels a long, long time ago, but it's easy to forget that back in December 2019, after a number of years of great uncertainty and political deadlock surrounding Brexit, that we actually finally got a government with a majority in the UK, and there is Boris Johnson celebrating over a pint. And for a short time, that gave us a little bit of buoyancy. It did enable a few investors to press the button on some significant projects of ours and others that we know about. But there was still this underlying uncertainty that was prevailing in the market, which meant that people were being very cautious and very careful, and prices were pretty steady. And I'm talking about January, February, just before COVID hit, and little did we know at that time what was about to hit us. And this graph is the Purchasers Managing Index over the last, 20 years or so, which basically represents the sentiment of people, and this is across all sectors in the construction industry, manufacturers and others, as to what they think workload is going to do. And you can see that dip back in 2008 and the years beyond, which was related to the global financial crisis and what that did to sentiment. But since then, it's been largely positive, albeit whilst it's been above that 50 benchmark line, and anything above 50, by the way, means that there's a positive sentiment. People think their workload in the future is going to be, in the near future, is going to be greater than it is today. But there's been that trend downward. So it's still positive, but less positivity, which was all related to tiredness over Brexit more than anything, in my opinion. And all through that period, whether the market has been buoyant or not, one of the things which hasn't changed in the UK construction market is the fragility of the supply chain, the financial fragility of the supply chain. And there have been a number of high-profile losses, Carillion being probably one of the biggest. And whilst there were particular issues with that company in terms of it had a lot of fingers in many pies, expanded very quickly, and some questionable accounting practices. Nonetheless, this sentiment that in construction, main contractors in particular, perhaps don't earn the rewards for the risks that are involved in particularly large and complex construction projects is a real issue going forward, and we can talk more about that later. I think whilst the construction industry has produced some amazing architectural and engineering and construction projects, there's no doubt that compared to other industries, we are resistant to change. We are slow on the uptake for new pieces of innovation and technology. And we're also historically, and I'll come to this later, particularly with the stuff that Fergus is doing, historically, we've really lacked a single voice to communicate with government, and which is really a reflection of the fragmentation of the industry. And it's not just a fragmentation of the entire industry. We find on individual construction projects there's a fragmentation across a number of disciplines. And for us, we issue these 6 monthly reports, which are our forecasts as what's happening to construction prices. But one thing we like to remind people is that behaviours, and when I say behaviours, I'm talking about setting up projects properly and professionally, doing the simple things well. They, more than anything, have a greater impact on construction prices than perhaps the components of inflation that many people are worried about. The other thing which hasn't changed in the UK construction industry is a chronic skill shortage and a low level of productivity. And I'm not sure about, I think there's a lack of data that's publicly published, but we know from our commercial projects in London that up to 80% of the workforce is foreign. It's not from the UK. It's from largely the EU and other countries as well. But, for a long time, we have relied on labour from outside the UK to do our work on construction projects. And that's why for a number of years, we've been worried about the UK government's immigration policy and how Brexit might affect that. And now, of course, COVID has sort of come to the top of the agenda. But this skill shortage is still there, and it raises questions about whether we can do more in terms of training the workforce, which is not a short and easy task, or whether we can employ technology and an industrialization of the process so that we are less reliant on labour. So given all of that, our view at the moment is it's probably more uncertain than it's ever been. And what we think is there's a whole, like this cocktail of pressures, both upward and downward on construction prices. So if we went back to the end of 2019, we were still predicting a 1% increase in construction prices during the course of this year. As COVID struck, we downgraded that to 0%, albeit that was back in April. COVID was still pretty new, and everyone's focus was on getting construction sites up and running, and there was a lot of uncertainty. We've now downgraded that further to, and this is an average, -2% for the next 12 months. And the reason I like to emphasize that is an average is that you do find a range of responses to construction tenders, but also where you have a very attractive project, which might either in scale or with a good client, a good team that has been well set up, where that meets a hungry supply chain, then there is that we think that -2% might be even lower. You might get even more competitive prices. Now, I say that with some caution because going back to that slide I had about supply chain financial fragility and losses that we've had, we for one as cost consultants do not want any part of the supply chain to be tendering at margins which are unsustainable. Recently in the last month or so, we've even seen negative margins in tenders, and it's definitely not our recommendation to clients to entertain that sort of tender response. So that's really just summarising our current position for this year, which is -2%, and how that compares to a whole range of commentators. For 2021, it's very difficult. We're just saying 0, so a very flat response, but there's a range of people, a range of forecasts out there from -2 to +2%. But we think there's a real possibility of a rebound in prices. Now, that might happen in 2022 or 2023, very difficult to say at the moment, but we think that would be a combination of a return to some confidence and therefore the development pipeline, but also, sadly, further constraints in the supply chain, i.e. losses of labour from the industry, people who've been furloughed or made redundant who will not return to the industry, and or some corporate losses. Put those two things together, then you could get a bit of a spike in either of those years. And when you look back in time over previous recessions, what tends to happen is that you get quite a short and sudden increase in prices, which takes a lot of people by surprise rather than a gentle upward trend. And of course, COVID, more than anything, is making commentators very uncertain about their predictions. We spend a lot of time not only researching but speaking to the supply chain and to markets to come up with our views. But one thing more than ever, more than anything, that this really tells us is that we need to control what we can control. So going back to what I said earlier about doing the simple things well, every task, if you need to do it at a certain date, making sure you do it on that time, making sure that everyone in the project at the start of a project is aware of what the overall objectives are, how communications will take place, how decisions will be made, what the metrics are that will make that project a success for clients. So if we look back to that PMI index and just go on a little while, then this sort of says the same thing as Pedro's graph earlier, and that sudden fall in sentiment after March this year. No surprises there whatsoever. And I think you're right, yes, construction output in the UK dropped by something like 40% in 1 month, which is a combination of lower productivity on site and projects either slowing down or stopping. And at the time, we had 30 live projects, and we analysed them very, very closely every week over, and we still do, starting in April. And what that showed 1 month into the lockdown that followed COVID was that the majority of construction sites, those 30 sites, were at productivity levels which were below 50%. No surprise there. But, and this is where I didn't actually know, I put this slide up before I knew Fergus was on board, but one of the positive things that have happened out of this is the Construction Leadership Council's site operating procedures, which is an excellent document and has made some welcome changes to how construction sites are planned and prepared and organised, and a lot of positive things there that they're encouraging both the supply chain and the government to do, which is making sites more productive and efficient, but also trying to encourage prompt payments and other financial measures that will ease the cash flows of the supply chain. And that, together with some pretty impressive things which are happening on individual projects, and we've seen the best of the construction industry over the last few months, I think, in some great imagination that's been taking place, some brilliant planning, which means that those productivity levels have been increasing from April up to current month, so that now the majority of projects you can see there are working at 80% or more productivity, which is, I think, a really impressive statistic. And we very quickly learned to embrace technology, as this sort of webinar shows, which is now the predominant way of communicating. But also, for example, this is a screenshot of one of our sites in London, which is a fit-out project where all progress reporting and our monthly valuations are taking place by a drone, which goes around the site, taking a constant video of progress. That would not have happened 4 months ago. And to reinforce the positivity, this is a great report that I'd recommend anyone to read, which was published by Loughborough University, but was based on 5 sites in London with 5 main contractors that you may or may not be able to read there. But what it showed was that those sites, and it reinforced our experience on our projects, very quickly got back up to very efficient levels, not only in terms of productivity, but the way they were managed, and the site tidiness just went up to levels which was not there before COVID. And one of the things it found was that in some sites there was a 50% reduction in workforce, but only a 30% reduction in productivity. And one of the conclusions they made is that in future, you will only now need 7.5 people on site to do the work of what was 10 people previously. So all of those things, in my mind, are giving some encouragement to, in future, hopefully the lessons learned from COVID on a practical nature on site, in terms of, spend a bit of time and effort in preparing and planning more, and you can make those sites much more efficient and hopefully give greater rewards, not only the main contractor, but trade contractors too. Now, Other structural challenges, I think, is as I mentioned before, and this does not only apply to contractors. This applies to consultants like myself as well. Sometimes humans just cannot help themselves, and they go back to this lowest price scenario. Not everyone, but it unfortunately, there's a bit of a return to this in the current environment. And what we're seeing at the moment is a massive range of tender returns. Some clients and some main contractors going to a greater number of contractors and subcontractors for tendering, and therefore that is exacerbating this scenario of a big range of returns. Real mixed messages coming back from the supply chain. And again, just one thing that we would reinforce is just the need to look at the qualitative return of the whole supply chain rather than the financial return. And one of the things we try to do to understand what is happening to prices is how prices generally are made up. What are the components of a typical construction project? And I know it varies, but this more or less reflects a London construction project where 40% of the price is down to materials, 20% labour, and therefore the whole of that other 40%, we call negotiable. All of it is negotiable. We have an influence on labour and materials, but all of those colourful parts of the pie chart on the left are not down to labour or materials. They're down to management. They're down to a contractor's prelims, his plant, his machinery, transport, his return, his risk allowances, all of the stuff which is not directly part of the building itself. And a lot of people focus on a main contractor's margins and overheads and profits, whether it should be 4%, 5%, 6%. We think this is a bit of a red herring. What is more important is how that all of those returns and all of those margins are made up throughout the whole of the supply chain, this sort of layering of the supply chain and the money on money effect, where if you get it wrong, then 5% on 5% on 10% on 5% actually becomes a large number when you add it up throughout the whole supply chain. And going back, possibly that's where the opportunities are, because if you can reduce that complexity of the supply chain, that layering, and perhaps the tendency to push risks down from the main contractor to various trade contractors and subcontractors, but not necessarily push the appropriate rewards in the same places. If we can somehow address that and make the whole process less fragmented, then that maybe is where the golden goose lies. This is an article that was published in Financial Times back in 2018 now, but it's one that we still refer to because it's very relevant to what I've just said. And the Financial Times called the typical construction procurement model in the UK an outsourcing model. And what it focused on was the fact that a main contractor who took ostensibly all the risks as far as the client is concerned actually only had 5% of the labour force on any typical project, but pushed all of that risk down the supply chain, and in fact was becoming a management organisation. And the Financial Times went as far as saying that the model is broken. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think the model needs addressing, which takes me on to the importance of supply chains. And let's focus on Brexit. I know, Pedro, I heard that word a number of times in your presentation, and this has been at the top of our agenda for 3 years or more and only replaced by COVID. But now with December looming, it's now back at the top of the agenda alongside COVID. And we've done, one of our researchers did a bit of work on what tariffs might be applied to a typical construction project for us. And looked at the new UK global tariff that will replace, if we don't have a deal, the EU's common external tariff, which seems to be categorized in these 3 points, where there will be no change, liberalized, i.e. going back to or staying at zero, or simplified in terms of a number of tariffs being covered together under a simplified number of headings. And within that context, we should remind ourselves that for us, and this is across all construction sectors, and these are government figures across the UK, 60% of our materials come from the EU currently. So it matters. This really matters. And that report breaks it down into raw materials, semi-manufactured materials, and products and components. And you can see there, the vast majority of the construction projects materials are actually finished components and products, including cement, rebar, and other things there. In fact, there are 12,000 categories, I should have said at the beginning. So our researcher went through all 12,000 to see what tariffs apply to each of those. But if you look at those, so there's £15 billion worth of products and components which are imported into the UK's construction industry. And the vast majority of those come from the EU. So again, it just reinforces how important the whole tariff situation is to us and our industry. Having said that, what we found is that going across all of those 12,000 components and applying those to the last 5 years of our construction projects, the net effect, the average premium was only 0.7%. And that is 0.7%, which is applied to materials. So if you remember, materials typically make up about 40% of a construction project, a commercial construction project in London. So that 0.7% as an average would be applied to that 40%. So it's no big deal in financial terms. However, what I would say was that 0.7% is an average, and some components will attract a much greater premium than others. So, for example, external walls could attract a premium of something like 10%. And if you took a tall commercial project in London, then that could mean a lot of money. So what it does mean is that we need to understand where our materials are coming from on each project and do an analysis on each project in turn, which goes back to my point earlier about understanding our supply chains much more clearly. And there's that 40% I was talking about. The other part of Brexit, which we're really not sure about, is what delays there will be and what this really means and what systems are already in place to ease those delays. And, we know at the moment, I live in Kent in the southeast of England, and I'm aware, looking at the press, that there are plans in place to deal with 7,000 vehicles leaving Kent to go to the continent, to possibly have to park them up because of the possible delays involved should a no deal occur. This is a real question mark for us at the moment. And the other important aspect, supply chain mapping and transparency is really important for a number of reasons. One is, as I said, you need to know how your prices are made up. The second is, given COVID, you need to know where the risks are in your supply chain. So when COVID first struck, we asked one of our main contractors on a project in London, do you know where your facades are coming from? And they said, yeah, they're manufactured in Germany. What they then realized was they might have been manufactured in Germany, but the screws came from China. The motors came from South Korea. The glass, the blinds, the gaskets, other components came from different countries. So the supply chain was much more complex than they realized. And it could have been one of those screws which was the weakest link. And this took me back to, I don't know if anyone is aware or remembers the Tesco Horsemeat fiasco of maybe 7 years ago, something like this, where it was found that Tesco's spaghetti bolognese that they sold in supermarkets in the UK was actually made from horse meat. It wasn't made from beef. And they found that Tesco used a factory in the south of France to produce that product. That factory in the south of France used an agent in Belgium who actually bought the meat from Romania. Actually, it was much more complex than that. KPMG, the management consultants, worked out there were 450 points on a typical supply contract in supermarkets. So much, much more complex than people imagine. Now, construction isn't in the process of buying meat, but at the same time, it's more complex than all of us imagine, which again just reinforces my point about we do need a greater transparency on the supply chain, and this is something we're looking at the moment. So the final section is, what are the key issues for our industry moving forward? We've had a massive focus on COVID. That will continue. We've had a massive focus on Brexit. That is coming back. All the while, over the last 2 years, climate change and producing buildings which are genuinely low in carbon has risen to the top of design team agendas. And my view is that all of those waves shown in that chart will now wash over one another, so they will all become equally important. And therein lies the challenge. But what it also means is, going back to what I said earlier, is that we must focus on the things that matter, the important things, and the things that we can control. And one of those things is building information modeling. Why isn't every project in the UK of a certain size using BIM? It should be our default setting. Our business, we're absolutely determined to use BIM on every project, and we're going to become a fully digital consultancy within a year. Everyone should be doing this. And there was a report by McKinsey produced earlier this year, which again I'd recommend everyone read, and I can circulate the name of it, which shows that it feels that construction now is hitting a real turning point. And I know we've said this before, but now it does think so. Because of the need for it to digitalize and industrialize in particular, all against the background of Brexit, COVID, and climate change. This is our opportunity now, which means that we really must embrace technology. We really must look at leaner design, because if we can look at spending money in the right places in our buildings, what we'll find is that both carbon and costs are both reduced. So you can employ initiatives in a design which will reduce carbon but increase cost. But often in our experience, if you can just reduce material waste, that will give you the benefit in both of those areas. And lots of people are saying, is there a better way to buy construction? You know what? Maybe there is, but I'm not sure if there's a silver bullet of a brand new procurement route that we haven't tried before. We organised a roundtable of some key clients earlier this year to see where, what makes projects either successful or a failure. And the overriding conclusion from that more than anything, it comes down to behaviours. Where I started this presentation is all down to behaviours. We know why things go wrong, but what we tend not to do is learn the lessons from those things. And most of them are pretty simple. Anyone looking at this from outside the industry would realise it's not rocket science. Why aren't we doing this? But you can really see the projects, and this is not supposed to be doom and gloom, because there are projects which do get this right, where the teams do work together and they do focus on doing the simple things well. So to end on a very positive note, I do actually genuinely believe that this is a real moment in time for us and a chance for us to get these things right, which is why in our last market report we finished on this 6-point manifesto. Aligning for success simply means setting up the project professionally and properly, procuring it in the right way, making the use of BIM, use BIM, strive for simplicity and design. More and more buildings need to be designed for their occupants and their users, and this is ever more important, which also means looking at net zero carbon and low carbon design and construction processes. But also, the final thing which COVID has really brought home to us, which is perhaps the most difficult thing of those 6 things, particularly for offices, is to create a market which will reflect the brave new world that we're all about to enter into. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for your insightful presentation. Without further ado, I will now invite to the floor Fergus Harridens. Fergus is Deputy Director for Construction in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Fergus, please help us to profile the construction sector in the UK and look at future scenarios. Fergus, you are now under the spotlight. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Carlos. As Pedro and Steve have covered a lot of the themes that I'm going to cover as well, I'll try and get through this as as quickly as possible in order that we've got some time for questions. The first slide really just explains the scale of the construction industry in the UK. If someone asks me the question, what does the construction sector represent in Britain? The answer is 9%. It's around 9% of all economic activity and around 9% of all employment. The biggest segment of activity in the industry is the contracting sector, the people who actually go out and build things, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's houses, whether it's repair and maintenance or improvement in people's homes. But we do have a sizable product manufacturing sector in the UK that produces everything from timber-based products to chemical products like paints and varnishes, through to manufactured goods like boilers or heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems. And we also have a very large professional services sector in the UK, surveying and other consultancy services, including digital consultancy services, engineering, design consultancy, architecture, professions like that. So it's a very significant and economically important sector in the UK. And it accounts for a large number of people in a whole range of different occupations, ranging from your high-end ones like civil engineering, project management, architecture and other professions, right the way through to what are essentially unskilled occupations in labouring. And this is one of the other reasons why it is such an economically important sector, because it does offer employment and career progression opportunities to a large number of people, albeit in many ways it is not a great industry to work in, because you do have very high levels of self-employment, employment uncertainty, and we see in every boom a great increase in construction employment, and then in a recession we see a significant drop in it. Just to look at the impact of coronavirus on the construction sector, we are a little bit more pessimistic than Pedro was. I think he's been influenced by the good weather in London in terms of his economic projections, but we're estimating that there will be a drop of around 20 to 25% in economic activity this year within the sector, which is a consequence in part of the impact of coronavirus that we've already seen, particularly in April and May this year, but also because the legacy impact of that has meant that there are going to be some delays in the award of contracts for particular programmes and projects, whether it's private sector or public sector, and some sectors in the UK that are traditionally big construction investors. So the leisure, the hospitality and the retail sectors are likely to simply pause their spending plans. So whilst we are seeing strong growth and an increase in the level of construction activity at the moment, it's quite concentrated in certain parts of the market, principally infrastructure, at the moment also private house building, whether it's new house building or whether again it's people investing in improving their own homes. And these are the sectors that we expect to continue to perform strongly. But with the current level of economic uncertainty, and Brexit is certainly a contributing factor to that and has been for several years, we're expecting that there's going to be a relatively low level of activity in the commercial construction market going forward, for probably at least 1 to 2 years. So our thinking about the trajectory for the recovery, and there are a number of different theories about this, but we think after a steep fall in activity, we are probably going to see a gradual tick-shaped recovery, potentially with a few fluctuations, but we think that it is likely to get to around the same level of activity in the sector that we saw in perhaps 2017 or 2018 in around 2022 or 2023. But an awful lot does, I think, depend on what happens over the next few months in terms of coronavirus and also in terms of whether or not the UK and EU manage to negotiate a free trade agreement. Because I think both of those have the ability to have a tremendous impact on confidence in the industry, and confidence is critical in construction, because whether you're an individual consumer or whether you're a multi-billion pound turnover business, making an investment in a construction project tends to be a very large, very long-term commitment. And if you don't have a degree of confidence in the future market and that your investment will generate a return, the natural instinct is to hold back from making that investment. And construction is an industry that absolutely relies on investment from outside because it doesn't tend to invest a great deal itself. But in terms of what we are actually doing to try and make sure that the industry does recover, at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, our response was very much a crisis management response. It was about trying to ensure that construction sites could continue to operate and to operate safely, to provide the industry with information and to make sure that they had access to government support schemes. But after about a month or so of being in that mode, we realised that we had to start thinking about the future and what type of an industry we wanted to see emerging from the downturn. So we produced, in conjunction with the industry, and this is a plan that is supported by both the government and industry, a 3-phase plan to firstly restart activity within the construction industry and maximise construction output and productivity, consistent with all the implementation of all of the guidelines that have previously been mentioned about safer working on sites. The second phase is how we adjusted to the new normal, if you like, and what is it that we can do to ensure that the industry is working efficiently, that we are continuing to bring forward projects to market, and also that the industry continues to invest in things like skills and innovation, which will drive long-term improvements in productivity and better quality outputs for clients, which is something that we as the government have been trying to get the industry to do for about the last 5 years through a number of initiatives, our Transforming Infrastructure Performance Plan or the construction sector deal that I was involved in preparing in the department, or some of the other initiatives that have been taken by individual departments in relation to their own programmes, like our Department for Transport. But then the final phase of the industry recovery plan is really about what is our vision for the future and what is it we want to see the industry look like when it emerges from the crisis. And this is a vision that's very different to what has gone before, because in the past it's been a very labour intensive, unproductive industry. It hasn't taken account of its social, economic and environmental impact beyond the scope of the project that it's actually executed at a particular time. Whereas what we want to see is a different approach, where we have a more sustainable industry, which is based on better and fairer contracts, an industry that shifts the basis of its business model to one that's driven by investment in skills, innovation, and has the capacity to develop and adopt new technologies. We also want to effect a shift in the attitude of clients and move away from focusing on a construction project as cost and actually look towards the outcomes and what value a construction project can add, and how, when we're making investment decisions in construction projects, we can take account of that wider economic and social value that I referred to earlier. And then finally, this is an industry that we want to do more to try and professionalise. We want to encourage investment in training people at all skill levels, but most importantly, we want to encourage a different attitude within the industry towards training and actually value its employees more and continue to invest in them. So someone might initially train as a carpenter or joiner, but over time, you expand, you develop their skills so that they're more capable of using digital tools, they're capable of undertaking different kinds of work, and they're actually capable of participating in some more complex projects. So for example, some of the sort that we're piloting at the moment around making homes and other buildings much more sustainable, much more energy and heat efficient, and with much lower carbon emissions. And these kind of jobs do often require people to have traditional skills, and they're the basis of what they contribute to the project. But they also need to have some higher level technical skills and higher level knowledge and the ability to work effectively as part of the team. And then just finally, what is really the vision for the construction industry in the UK? Well, we've set a number of objectives by 2025. We want to reduce the whole life costs of built assets, buildings and infrastructure by a third. We want to increase delivery times by 50%. We want to reduce carbon emissions by 50%. And we're also looking to increase our exports of goods and services based on some of the things that we hope we will be able to do here, as well as or better than anyone in the world, which includes things like the use of digital technologies within construction in the built environment, and also the industrialisation of construction. And then just finally, if I look towards 2021, a lot of these themes have been picked up, but I have to mention Brexit. It is a key determinant of the future of the industry and what happens next year. We'll have to see where we are when the transitional period ends on the 31st of December, what happens in the FTA negotiations. But there are potentially big impacts on the 8% of UK construction workers that come from the European Union or the European Economic Area. There could be labour and skill shortages. What are it's going to be the impact on the movement of goods? Are there going to be disruptions or delays caused by the introduction of new customs procedures? And two things that haven't been mentioned: the move to the new UK conformity assessment mark and potentially new product safety rules and standards. And also for those firms that do trade across borders, application of the general data protection regulation rules. There's also some problems with the insurance market in the UK following Grenfell, Carillion and the impact of coronavirus. The insurance industry is very worried about its exposure to the construction industry. Firms are finding it harder to get the insurance that they need to operate in the UK. An enormous and very significant piece of legislation will be brought to the House of Commons, our Parliament, next year to improve standards of building safety. This follows the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017 and will fundamentally change the process that we apply in the UK for ensuring that buildings are safe, and will require people who are building those types of buildings like high-rise accommodation that we classify as high risk to really change the way in which they operate, gather, retain, and have exposed to external scrutiny much more detailed information about that project, and actually have it signed off at 5 separate points over the course of the life of the building, from design to the point when it enters operation. And then finally, there have been a number of competition cases within the UK. There is some bad practice within the industry, and it is just worth noting that our Competition and Markets Agency conducts quite a few investigations into the construction industry. A number of firms in a whole range of different subsectors in the industry have been caught out by this. So it is well worth familiarising yourself with the rules if you want to sell into the market in the UK, because the penalties for breaking competition law can be quite significant. That's it for me. Apologies for taking a little bit longer than I hoped I would, but hopefully there is some time for a few questions.
Thank you, Fergus, for your presentation. Let's now head to the Q&A session. We have already some questions from our audience. As we are short of time, I will kindly ask our guests to be as direct as possible in your answers. Pedro Lucas asks, Pedro Lucas would like to know your opinion on the digitization of the AECO sector. AECO, for those who don't know, stands for Architecture, Engineering, Construction, and Owner. He would like to know your opinion about the digitization of this AECO, namely how relevant building information modeling objects may be to Portuguese manufacturers. Maybe previously.
Well, I'll start with, I mentioned it in my presentation, and what I didn't say was that, we have real evidence that where we have had projects that has embraced BIM from the start, it's created much better designs, much tighter tender documentation, and therefore more robust and competitive prices. So we have real evidence that, there is a commercial advantage and a benefit to using BIM, which makes it all the more disappointing that it's not at greater levels than it currently is. When you look at other industries, lawyers, for example, I'm very aware of the lawyers, the legal sector already embracing blockchain. Who'd have thought that a year ago? So, whatever form of digitalization you're talking about, for me, it's just inevitable. It will happen. At the moment, I think to date, there's been a little bit of frustration because of different practices using different platforms to an extent, although that's being overcome, and just a natural tendency to avoid that change. But for me, it's accelerating and it will happen.
This one is for you, Fergus. It comes from Michael Castro. He will like to know about the growth rate. Which is the growth rate for the construction sector forecast for 2020 and 2021?
For 2020, the growth rate is negative. It's -20 to -25%. We think over the course of the remainder of the year and 2021, the industry is probably going to grow by around 7 or 8% per month. But remember, we are starting from a low base, so we estimate it will take at least 2 years to recover to the levels of activity that you've seen over, say, the past 5 years.
Another question from Michael Castro, and this time I think it will be for you, Steve. Michael would like to know which is the best strategy to have access to the distribution of electrical and telecommunications material network in the UK for residential and commercial buildings.
Gosh, I mean, the residential sector is quite different to commercial office sector in the way the projects are set up, and there tends to be more of a demarcation between the shell of a building and its fit out. But even so, like most construction projects, the best route is through a main contractor, is what I would say. But I can give you a more detailed answer by email afterwards.
Thank you, Steve. José Silva would like to address a question about accreditations. Can a company not based in the UK get the accreditations required by most part of the main contractors in order to be able to participate in their tenders? Who would like to have this one?
I can answer on accreditation. Yes, it is possible for a company that's based outside the UK to get the accreditation. At this point in time, and for a period past the end of the transition period, if you sell products into the UK, provided that you have followed the usual route for getting these accredited to ensure compliance with the construction products regulation, you will be able to sell those products onto the UK market. It's a slightly more complex situation if you are looking to be accredited to a certain standard, a UK standard or an international standard, which certain prime contractors might require for the supply of certain services. But there is no legal bar to firms outside the UK being accredited to those standards.
Marta Pérez would like to know about the status of building information modeling in the UK.
Well, if you are working on a government-funded project, since 2016, you have had to use building information modelling for the design of that project. It's something that we announced we were doing in 2011. We introduced it in 2016, and we estimate that it has saved taxpayers in the UK about £7 billion through all of the things that Steve mentioned in terms of better design, reduced rates of rework, helping plan schedules so that they're more accurate and they're easier for firms to deliver. In the private sector, it is a little bit more mixed. In certainly things like the house building sector, they essentially don't really use BIM. Smaller scale construction projects, they don't use it. But if you would be working on a large scale private sector construction project, I think you can assume that you would have to be competent and capable of using BIM, and there would be an expectation on the part of the client and the prime contractors that you would be able to do that.
A question now on industrial manufactured products from Liliana Martins. She asks, which is the biggest challenge for Portuguese industry companies that do not have a connection with any UK company? In other words, how can a Portuguese company export industrial manufactured products to the UK, namely wood and steel products?
I mean, provided your product has been certified as compliant with the construction product regulation and also the relevant conventions in relation to timber to ensure that it's been sustainably sourced, there is no regulatory barrier at this point to placing your products on the UK market. The real challenge, I think, is finding a customer, a firm that wants to either use it as a component part in a product that they are manufacturing, or a builder's merchant or supplier that wants to sell this product into the market on your behalf. But I think that is really the key challenge. And that can be quite a big challenge in the UK because the sector is so large and there are so many firms, some operate regionally, some operate nationally, and a lot of them do have their own suppliers. But I think that's the area that it's worth investigating. Who are the people who sell your products in the UK?
Fergus, Carlos, if I may add to what Fergus says, yes, it is a challenge, and it's a challenge that AICEP is here to help companies like yours. So please do get in contact with us. We can see with you which companies are importing, which companies already import from Portugal, which companies import from other countries, which we can contact these companies and ask them, would you be interested? And via video conference, what we've done with other companies is try and prepare a program for you where you present your program, your product to the potential buyer. And of course, if you have the necessary certificates and if you're competitive, from what we know, there was no reason why you should not be able to at least have someone from the other side listening to you and get into a negotiation. So that it's hard, it requires time, but please do contact us.
Thank you, Pedro. Now a question about most demanded buildings in the UK from Michael Castro. He asks, what type of building pattern is the most demanded in the UK? Economic, medium, or high standard?
I'm seeing, certainly, I mean, probably the most difficult sector at the moment, which Fergus's figures confirmed, is the commercial office sector. But what we're finding in that sector is what people are calling a flight to quality. So it's in the future, it'll be even more important that office buildings will be of a higher quality, not just because of COVID, but because of tenant demand. You know, just the big, and also because there is a lot of sort of second quality stuff on the market, which has just been made more redundant by what has happened over the last 6 months. So I think that's the bright spot in the weather looking forward, albeit, as Fergus mentions, and we agree, is going to take probably a couple of years to get to a point where that sector is becoming buoyant again. But for us, we're looking beyond those sectors. The real key sectors are, again, as Fergus said, private housing going forward, infrastructure, and we're relying more than ever on you know, the government following through with its investment, but also stuff like life sciences and healthcare, which you know, become even more important post-COVID.
Ricardo Figueira shares us the fact that his company actually posts workers to the UK and asks, is it possible to post workers to the UK from 1st of January 2021? It depends on any agreement between the EU and the UK.
Well, we did a number of announcements in relation to this. We have published the details of a new points-based migration system, which sets certain criteria that people posted to the UK will have to fulfil in terms of the level of their qualification and the level of salary that they're going to have. In general, I think the more highly skilled and highly paid a worker is, the easier you are going to find it to post them to the UK. Where I think it's going to be most difficult, certainly in the short term, is in relation to people with lower skills, or ones where there is not a mutual recognition agreement of qualifications in place, or it's hard for the immigration services in the UK to determine what skill level this person actually has. Obviously, as well, though, there might be, as part of a free trade agreement, an agreement on what's called Mode 4 in trade negotiations around the movement of skilled people, which could further influence the rules and perhaps make this slightly easier. But at this point in time, I think you have to look to the information that's been published already about the future migration system in the UK.
That was
Very quickly.
to add on that, perhaps the rules may be changed to adapt to the necessities that the UK may need in the future, because the current ones that have been implemented, as Fergus referred, are, and I mentioned in my presentation very briefly, they're usually for highly qualified or more qualified workers. So in the construction sector, from what we have here, it must be very tough to have workers coming in based in the UK.
Thank you, Pedro. João Abreu is now addressing Steve Watts. Steve, you have referred that the industry may need to change the way of procuring. I am aware that one of the preferable procurement routes to Alinea is for big packages, is a two-stage tender and engagement through PCSA, directly with the employer, with a potential novation to the main contractor. Under such procurement route, do you see the PCSA as a good option to just remove design risk or to remove all general package risk? For example, Brexit COVID program, is there something that your clients see as normal, or are they expecting only design development and price tracking against the referred design development?
We are massive fans of the PCSA process, which we use prior to Alinea on the Shard in London. We procured the external walls on that building 3 years. We started conversations with the facade subcontractor 3 years before we got the main contractor on board. It wasn't supposed to be that long, but the point was that we had a PCSA agreement that was very tight and tied not only to technical requirements, but to hitting the budget as well. And we've used that model on current buildings as well, particularly on the facades, but not exclusively on the facades. So 22 Bishopsgate, which is now, which is one of the tallest in the city, we PCSA'd not only external walls, but actually all of the key packages, and negotiated all of those key packages under budget. Now, not all clients will do that, particularly where I think cladding more than any element is suited to that route, because you really need a trade contractor who is the specialist to help the architect and the rest of the team achieve his design intent, but doing it in a way which matches the budget. So we're all working as one team. So absolutely, yes, PSA will always have a part to play.
A question now on border procedures from Ricardo Figueira. From 1st of January, with the border procedures, is it required for the construction materials to have some kind of license from the UK authorities?
No, you don't need an import license. Your product, you will have to be able to demonstrate that your product complies with the regulations, but no, you don't need a special license in addition to normal paperwork.
João Abreu, directly to Fergus Harridans. Has you referred PI costs since Grenfell are beyond reasonable, and the part of this, all insurers are now excluding any claim related to fire compliance in terms of design. What is your view about this? How can companies cope with such PI increases and exclusions?
For the benefit of people who don't know, PI is professional indemnity insurance. It's the type of insurance that covers the way in which you undertake certain kinds of work, for example, design and consultancy work. Yes, you're absolutely right. The costs of obtaining PI insurance have escalated dramatically in the UK over the last 2 years, and the number of exclusions in policies for things like fire safety related work are also increasing. If you are working in other parts of the construction market, so you're not working on high-risk residential buildings and you're not undertaking work in relation to fire safety, costs have increased, but policies tend to be affordable and they tend to cover most activities. In relation to the work on fire safety, well, we currently have a programme of work within the UK government, and we are working with the insurance industry on what possible solutions there are to this, because we recognise that at this point in time, the UK does not really have a functioning insurance market for professional indemnity insurance in relation to that kind of construction work.
A very quick question to Pedro Patricio from João Abreu about custom tariffs. Are custom tariffs post-transition period defined on UK on gov.uk? Can you please provide links? I'm sure you can provide them later if they are there.
Well, on gov.uk, we currently don't know what tariff will be implemented. So, assuming there is a no deal, the tariffs to be implemented will be the World Trade Organization, Organização Mundial do Comércio. You have access direct to their link, and you can put down the product and see what tariffs would be implemented. On the three links that I have on our presentation, the one of AICEP has a hyperlink, has a link to various documents that refer to the different tariffs that could be implemented, including the one on World Trade Organization.
Thank you, Pedro. We are running out of time, but we still have time for a last question from Kent Ward about certification. BBA certification is a fairly long and involved process. Is it possible for new construction products to enter the UK market while under the process of certification?
If they have been certified by a body in another EU member state, then yes, you should be able to sell these products on the UK market.
A question from Guilherme Rodrigues to Fergus Harridans. Taxes. If I sign a contract for a supplier of steelworks to a project in Africa with a British company that has fabrication facilities in Portugal and finishing facilities in the UK, steelworks will be manufactured in Portugal, sent to the UK for finishing, and then sent to Africa. Is it likely that those steelworks will pay higher taxes due to Brexit?
There is a risk that they will. I'm afraid this is one of those questions where the only answer at this point in time is we will have to see what the outcome of the free trade agreement negotiations are with the EU. You would hope that the UK and the EU can reach an agreement that would mean that imports of steel and things like that don't face any additional tariffs. But at this point in time, and assuming there is no deal, then you would have to say, what, in the event that there was no deal, you would have to say the likelihood is that they would face extra costs.
We are out of time. We have to wrap up. Steve and Fergus, thank you both for performing such interesting and useful presentations for us today. Obrigado também ao Pedro Patrício, ao meu colega delegado da AICEP em Londres. Obrigado a todos os que estiveram hoje connosco. Continuam a acompanhar os webinars que a AICEP está a organizar para ajudar as empresas a atravessar estes tempos difíceis do Covid-19. Eu recomendo que mantenham contacto com o seu gestor de cliente e acompanhem os nossos canais web para manter a sua agenda de webinars atualizada. Once again, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Fergus, for your time. Hope to see you in the near future. Stay well, stay safe.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Fergus. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.